This is the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. On today's program, I want to talk about how elite groups have been and are in the process of radically restructuring our society. Now, first and foremost, we have to understand that I'm not talking about merely superficial things that many of you are already aware of. I'm talking about the fact that if you go back to ancient secret occult societies, if you go back to the origins of the communist movement, the foundation of communism, the foundation of socialism, the foundation of Marxism, even though socialists, communists, Marxists claim to be militantly atheists, they claim to be what is called scientific materialists, which really isn't scientific at all. It simply means that science says that the only thing that exists is the reality that we can perceive with our physical senses. That's essentially scientific materialism, because the idea is we have proof and evidence of the existence of physical reality because we can perceive it through our eyes, our ears, our senses, and so on and so forth. So the whole communist movement, which really began with the French Revolution, made a huge priority what is called rationalism, logic, reason, and they disavowed anything to do with God, Christianity, the Bible, but they disavowed at least publicly, they disavowed anything to do with what would be called the supernatural or realities in multiple dimensions. They were militantly, again, at least publicly, they said these things didn't exist because we in the communist movement or the French Revolution only believe in what we call science, logic, and reason. But that's not really the truth about either the French Revolution or the communist revolutions. And let's remember that the French Revolution and the philosophies behind the French Revolution were, they pretended to be about science, logic, and reason. But if you dig deeper underneath the surface, they were hiding a tremendous amount, because there was definitely, without question, historically documented proof that both the French Revolution, socialist, communism, Marxist revolutions were heavily influenced by satanic doctrines and the occult, spiritism, and so forth, so on and so forth. I deal with all of this in my brand new book, The Greatest Battle for the Hearts and Minds of Mankind in the History of the World, because it's essential that you know this. You know, I'll be very honest with you. It's very, very disturbing to me, and it has been for quite some time. It's extremely disturbing to me that when I talk about these kinds of things, which are really essential things for Christians and Christian leaders and denominations and seminaries to know, especially those Christian seminaries and those denominations and those that are Christian leaders. It's essential that they know this. This is not like you can take it or leave it. You can't accomplish anything. Because you see, if you don't understand the battle you're really in, you can't possibly win it. And the total, well, I shouldn't say total, but the almost total ignorance of any kind of knowledge of these kinds of things is appalling. I'm talking about among seminary professors and Christian leadership and denominations, and even the average Christian. It's really appalling. It's appalling in light of the fact that week after week, sermons are preached, they're the spiritual equivalent of. Now I'm going way, way back in my memory. Well, not way, way back in my memory, but I was trying to remember my own childhood, but I gave up. But I remember our children and what we would feed them when they were little infants, besides milk, etc. And they had, like most babies, baby food. And I can't remember the name of the company, but it's the biggest company that makes these little. At least at that time, there were little glass bottles of baby food, and you'd unscrew the metallic top, and you'd serve your little infant, your little baby food, and it would be like peaches or carrots, but it'd be mixed up to a very like applesauce type mixture, and you would feed your child. Yeah, Gerber's, I think that's it. Am I right? I don't know. Gerber's baby food, does that sound familiar? I think that's what it was. So that's baby food, okay? Baby food actually tastes good. I know you adults, you've all cheated like I have, and you've tried some of the baby food, and it tastes good, probably because they put sugar in it. But here's the point. Baby food is fine for babies, because babies cannot digest more complex and heavier food substances. So baby food is like, for lack of better words, it sounds disgusting, pre-digested food, but that's not really. It's just easier for the baby to swallow. Okay, we all know that, all right? But baby food is for babies. Baby food is for babies. So then why, every week in America, at such a large percentage of the churches, why are the Christian congregations that consists of adults or young adults or teenagers or whatever, why are they being fed a spiritual diet of baby food? Because when you feed people coming to your church, adults, teenagers, whatever, when you are continually feeding them baby food, you are producing, inevitably, spiritual babies, spiritual infants. And that's fine when somebody has newly been saved and they're just starting to grow spiritually. Yeah, okay, then they're spiritual babies. So they need baby food. They needed, a message that's light and easy for them to digest so they can grow spiritually. But of course, the Bible teaches and common sense teaches that after a certain period of time, spiritual growth is designed to occur. And in order for that spiritual baby, and it's legitimate when they're newly converted, in order for that spiritual baby to become a new man or a new woman in Jesus Christ, in order for them to be used by Christ, in order for the power of the Holy Spirit to move through their lives, in order for their destiny to be fulfilled, they have to grow up spiritually. I mean, the Apostle Paul didn't talk about baby food per se, but he used the term milk. Why are you feeding the flock milk when they should be eating meat, etc., at this time in their spiritual growth? In other words, he was rebuking the church back then. The Apostle Paul was rebuking the church, exhorting the church, and basically saying, you're supposed to be growing in the Lord Jesus Christ. You're not supposed to be spiritual babies endlessly. And so the Apostle Paul exhorted them and rebuked them for their lack of spiritual growth, and the fact that their lack of spiritual growth was connected to their spiritual diet. They were still eating baby food, milk, and they weren't ready yet for strong meat, the strong meat of the Word. because they weren't growing. Now, if somebody's perpetually a child, that's a problem. But we have, in evangelical Christianity, we have a problem among many problems. But the problem is you have people who are perpetually being fed a diet in terms of sermons and messages that is designed for a spiritual infant or a baby. There doesn't seem to be a growth process where it's evident that the spiritual babies are turning into spiritual adults. And one of the ways they become spiritual adults is that you incrementally increase the diet. You transform the diet incrementally into more of an adult diet, just like you do with little kids. When they're ready, then you can take corn and cut the corn off the cob and serve it to them. They're able to eat that, and so on and so forth. They can eat pieces of fruit and then, yogurt or whatever. And then you can move on to even more adult foods where there's like stronger proteins, etc. So the goal is maturation, the process of maturing. Because you can only be the person God created you to be when you become a spiritual adult. But you watch these sermons, and it's a never-ending cycle of spiritual baby food. So there's a big problem there. And it's not a problem, it's a crisis, for crying out loud. It's a crisis. Okay, so what I talked about just a couple of minutes ago is getting into topics that deal with the meat of God's Word, where somebody who's properly spiritually maturing should grow to. And so you have to not only intensify the spiritual diet from the Word of God, you have to equip believers and mature believers to understand their Bibles and how to connect their Bibles to reality and to the world that we live in. That's part of being a big boy or a big girl. That's an expression parents say sometimes to the children. Well, you're a big girl now. You're a big boy now. Because you don't treat them as they get older as you do when they're babies. But we have a lot of people that we can't even call a big girl or a big boy spiritually. They haven't matured into adulthood. So that is a problem, and it's not an accidental problem. It's a problem of a lack of effective Bible teachers, a lack of effective sermons, a lack of effective and biblical, of course, more than anything, effective theological training. So you're incapable of fighting the spiritual war that, whether you like it or not, you're going to be in the middle of. So we come into life right now, and as I've said before, and I've said it a lot lately because this is what I'm working on every day, the final edit of the greatest battle for the hearts and minds of mankind in the history of the world. And there are things that should be on the top of in the radio business, they call top of the mind. When you're writing an effective advertising commercial on radio, top of the mind is one principle in writing effective radio commercials. Like what comes to the top of the mind immediately. You're using that as a tool of radio advertising communication. So we need to have teaching that is applicable to what's really happening all around us. And if it's not, then it's useless. If what you're teaching from the Scripture does not equip God's people to deal with the reality around them and the reality that's coming, your teaching is ineffective. So let's go back to what should be it shouldn't be considered, the cop-out is, this is too high level for Christians. This is too above Christians. I hate to break it to you, but the people who say that suffer from a syndrome called stupidity, because it's not too high for Christians. When you are guilty of, look, society intentionally, through social engineering, has been successfully dumbing down populations in America and around the world. In the book that I'm finishing up, I have documented evidence of scientific reports that came out this year, which determined that people are dumber, and their IQs are going down. In other words, they're dumber and their IQs are going down all around the world. That's not an accident. That's being done intentionally. People aren't just, mystically becoming dumber. They're becoming dumber because they're being dumbed down through social engineering. Why? Because dumbed down people become soft targets. They're vulnerable to psychological manipulation, brainwashing, persuasion, propaganda, and stuff like that. So it's the best interest in a hidden elite totalitarian state to keep the people dumb, keep them stupid, because then you can manipulate them. But a faithful Bible teacher or a faithful pastor or preacher or a faithful Christian theological seminary should never be dumbing their students down biblically and in terms of developing a biblical worldview. God forbid. Your goal as a Bible teacher is to raise the bar, to raise the standard, and believe God as you teach the Word and how to apply the Word to reality effectively, that people will rise to the occasion. And they will, by the way. If you give them the opportunity, and you're not a bore when you're preaching or teaching, if you're not a bore and you challenge the people to rise to the occasion, guess what? They do rise to the occasion. A Christian minister or a Bible teacher has no business dumbing down the people. Okay? And when I hear people constantly talking to people in Christian ministry circles as if they were kindergarten kids, I have a problem with that. The culture's dumbing them down. So why are you contributing to the dumbing down by talking to them like they're kindergartners? They're smarter than you think, but you gotta rise to the occasion yourself. So people need to understand how the Bible and a biblical worldview and the truth of Scripture affects and impacts the society we're in. So let's go back to a truth that should be top of the mind. Every minister, every seminary, and a good percentage of Christians, and all Christians are in the ministry, just some are full-time, some are part-time or whatever, but a significant percentage of evangelical Christians should know the kinds of truths that I'm talking about now. So let's go back to communism, okay, and socialism. Because socialism is, right now, the biggest threat facing America. And let's just start at the beginning. If you don't understand why socialism is the biggest threat facing America, which I guarantee you that some massive percentage of Christians in America and churches have no real clue as to why socialism right now is the biggest threat to America. Because they have no knowledge and education of socialism versus the Word of God. Because nobody has been a faithful Bible teacher to teach them. So they're soft targets. Okay, so why is socialism? And let's remember the foundational rule. Again, I explained this in The Greatest Battle. Let's remember the foundational rule. This was said by all the communist leaders. Socialism is not really a real stage. Socialism is not really it's not really real. Socialism, according to the communist leaders, is nothing more than a stepping stone into communism and Marxism. So socialism is kind of a soft introduction to get you into communism. Socialism, nobody camps out. According to the communist leaders, nobody, no nation parks around socialism all that long. Because socialism is designed to be a transition into communism and Marxism, which are brutal totalitarian states. Now, socialism is, let's say, the introductory course in the menu, okay? And socialism, like communism and Marxism, only advances on lies and deception and propaganda and brainwashing because it's built on a total lie. Because the socialist theory does not work. It has never worked. And that's not my opinion. That's an historical documented fact. But of course, if you don't teach people history and you don't teach them the facts, that they don't know that. And so they're vulnerable to the lies, to the seduction. Because socialism, communism, and Marxism is a seducer. It promises people wonderful things by lying to them. And then when the trap door is closed, you're a prisoner. So that's what's happening in America right now. We have all these people coming forward, and they are proudly saying that they're socialists, and they're offering up what they call socialist solutions to America. Or they're offering up as their political platforms, they're suggesting ideas that are totally built upon the teachings of socialism, which has never worked anywhere. And the platforms they're offering, the solutions they're offering, and including people that should know better, like one particular elderly gentleman who looks like he's getting senile. No, I'm serious. I'm not making fun of him, but he looks like he's getting senile and should know better. It's rather pathetic. Okay, so they're offering what they think are solutions, what they think are answers, and they're all based on the failed principles of socialism and the failed principles of communism and the failed principles of Marxism. Let me just toss out a couple to you. Universal health care is a platform of Marxism, communism, and socialism. The real purpose of universal health care, this is, again, is not my opinion, it's a fact. So, people can argue, but the only way you can argue is to present lies. Because you see, there's a strategy behind getting people to accept socialism, Marxism, and communism. You want me to simplify it for you? And I don't mean to talk down to people. But I was imagining I was talking in one of these churches where the pastor was never faithful enough to tell people about this. And you can explain it very simply. Okay? I mean, you can make understanding socialism, communism, and Marxism so simple. You just say it like this. Socialism, Marxism, and communism is based on the Santa Claus principle. Okay? When kids are taught about Santa Claus as kids, Santa Claus comes to bring presents and gifts, lots of presents and gifts. And maybe you leave out a glass of milk and a cookie for him. Okay? Socialism is based on the Santa Claus principle. That big government is going to give you lots of free gifts. You don't have to work for them. Now, that's really simple, but it's also a lie because gifts cost money. Somebody has to pay for them. So the other principle of socialism, communism, and Marxism is they claim that they're going to fairly redistribute the wealth. So they're going to take the wealth from the rich to pay for the health care of the poor. They're going to take the wealth, that's a joke, of the middle class and pay for the medical care or education or whatever of the poor. Sounds noble, doesn't it? But it's a lie. So they have all these programs, which are like gifts from Santa Claus, that they're going to give to people. Now, why are they doing that? Because what they're doing is they're attempting to seduce the dumbed down, the stupid, the historically ignorant, and that includes Christians, lots of Christians. It's a seduction. It's a hustle. It's a con game. They're making promises that they can't deliver just so they can get elected. But the people that they're talking to, and this is all races, white, Hispanic, African American, and you can go down the list, all races are susceptible to this seduction. They make promises that they can't keep, and they know they can't keep them. But it doesn't matter. They're just doing it in the short term, because once they get your vote, they're elected, they're in power, and tough luck. Too bad. We didn't deliver on what we promised. So what? What are you going to do about it? See, they're elected. They'll say anything to get elected. That's how communism and communist revolutions happen. That's how socialism takes place. You make a bunch of promises that you can't keep. Sounds like you're going to make heaven on earth for the average person. The average person has been dumbed down deliberately by the state, including Christians, so they believe anything you say because they've been dumbed down. They have no idea of history. They have no idea of evidence. Okay? So they promise universal health care. They promise tremendous education for everybody. They promise new job training and new jobs for everybody, new high-paying jobs for everybody. Santa Claus presents, one after the other. Then they promise we're going to fairly redistribute the wealth. So we'll have a 60% or 70% tax rate. Because after all, these super rich can afford it. And, also the middle class can afford it. Even though the middle class are sliding into the working class, these politicians don't care. They're going to say anything it takes to get elected. And they go down the list of what they're going to do for you. They're going to solve all the problems. And then, magically, at the same time they're going to solve all the problems, they're going to raise your taxes higher and higher and higher. Now tell me, just use your common sense. If you're working at all, if you're working class or middle class, or you have jobs or a job, and your taxes are being raised higher and higher, it's not all going to be, they lie. It's not, the taxes are not all going to be paid by the rich. No, everybody will be paid taxes. So how is your standard of living going to go up if you have less and less money to spend because they keep raising your taxes? The answer is, if you know diddly squat about economics, the answer is your standard of living can't go up if you keep losing or they keep taking away more and more of the money that you earn. So even let's say you get a raise. Let's say they actually deliver on something, which they won't, but let's say they do. Okay, so you're making more money, okay, because they fix the economy. Which, by the way, socialism, Marxism, communism has never fixed an economy in a bad way, in a good way. It's always a bad way. Well, what does it matter if you're making more money, if you're paying more taxes? When the day is done, you have less money to actually put in your pocket, and that's what matters. So you're not doing better, you're doing worse. See, it's all based on lies and deception. But people, they're going to get conned because they're dumbed down. They don't know the historical track record. The documented evidence is everywhere regarding socialism, communism, and Marxism. And let me give you a short version of what the documented evidence says, without exception. In every nation without exception, every nation without one single exception, socialism, communism, and Marxism has made people's lives worse. Economies crash. And when you get into communism and Marxism, you live in a totalitarian state, and it is a nightmare and hell on earth. That is the process without exception. And again, as I repeated the other day, if you believe this smoke and mirrors garbage about, oh, look at the Scandinavian nations like Norway, they're socialist and they're doing well. What are you, an idiot? They were doing well, past tense. And the only reason they were doing well is because they used to be capitalist nations with a Protestant Christian work ethic. So they had money put away in bank accounts, land, businesses, etc. And so it was their capitalist, Christian, Protestant work ethic that gave them a big cushion that made it appear like when they turned socialist that socialism was working. Sorry, totally not true. Once they actually had to rely on socialism and they had spent their legacy of capitalist Protestant work ethic money, they're no longer the prosperous nations that the socialists and communists like to point to as an example of success. And then the other lie you always hear is, oh, we're fixing it. We're fixing it. They used to tell me that 45 years ago when I was a kid. Yeah, we're fixing it. We're creating a social democracy. Or now they call it democratic socialism. Well, democratic socialism is the exact thing that when I was a kid they called a social democracy or democratic socialism. You play on the words, but it's the same thing. It's the lie that we're going to create a new version of socialism, because anybody with any brains knows that socialism stinks, and it'll be democratic. The people will begin to be allowed to vote. That's impossible. If you had one brain cell, not two, if you had one brain cell that worked, you would know that that was impossible. Why? Because socialism, by its very nature, is all about government growing bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger to manage and micromanage every part of the economy. Okay? That is socialism. Giant government to micromanage everything. Okay? So you have two opposing beliefs. You say we've invented a new thing, or we're going to promote this new thing, which, by the way, is not a new thing. It's been around for ever. It's one of the biggest lies that they go to. You lie and say, we're going to have a democratic socialism. That's impossible. Because socialism is based on a giant, all-powerful government managing everything, controlling everything, whether you like it or not. How can you have a democracy where the people's votes actually mean something, and yet at the same time have this gargantuan, all-powerful, endlessly growing government that is going to micromanage and control everything, whether you like it or not? Once the socialist government is in place, they don't ask your opinion. They're all powerful. So you have to be an imbecile. You really do. You have to be worse than an imbecile. You have to be the biggest sucker that has ever come down the road. Because if you had more than one, if you had even had a single solitary brain cell, you would be able to compute in your mind that you can't have a democracy where the people get to vote and change things, and at the same time have an all-powerful government which isn't going to listen to you. I mean, come out of the trance state, bozo. I mean, wake up and smell the coffee. You need to send this to your millennial friends that have drunk, worse than drunk, the Kool-Aid. They are baptized in the Kool-Aid. Because, by the way, communism is a religion. Socialism is a religion. In my book, The Greatest Battle for the Hearts and Minds of Mankind, I prove that. I was working on the final edit of that chapter today. It's a total lie that they're about materialism and atheism and humanism. Behind the Wizard of Oz curtain that they hide, there is deep, deep. I was going to say something that was polite, but it was a polite way of saying something not so polite, so I backed off. Deep, deep, you can figure it out. It's a lie. Behind the mask of communism, Marxism, and socialism are hardcore, occult, secret societies that use satanic principles. I'm not just talking about it. I've done my homework. I've done 45 years of intensive study. When I work, I work. You know why? I'm not a socialist. I don't sit on my posterior expecting handouts. You understand what I'm talking about? I'm not a Marxist and communist. I believe in a biblical work ethic, which means Paul McGuire gets up and works his posterior off every single day. And he gives it all he has in everything he does. So I get up early and I put in, if I told you the total hours per day that I put in, you'd think I was lying. So I'm not going to tell you. Okay? I'm not going to tell you because people go, oh no, he's lying. No, I'm telling you the truth, but you wouldn't believe the truth, so I'm not going to tell you how many hours a day I work. And I do my homework. And so, socialism can only proceed through propaganda, lies, Santa Claus, gifts, promises that they cannot deliver on. But once they got the vote and they're in office, bam, the door shuts in your face and you can kiss your democratic socialism goodbye forever because it ain't coming back. That is the lesson of socialism, communism, and Marxism. Just look at history. Pop the balloon of delusion of these people that you know. Millennials especially. Millennials don't like to have rational conversations. The minute you talk to a millennial and you start to talk about facts and logic and history and documentation, they go emotionally ballistic. Just like grown-up adults who are married to a liberal, socialist, Marxist, communist philosophy. When you pin them down on the facts and the documentation, they always lose their temper and start screaming and calling people names. Because they too have a diaper problem. Except with them, it's a diaper problem that they've inflicted on themselves. They're babies. They don't want to face reality. They want to deny reality. So, socialism never works anywhere, never has. Every time a socialist party gets into power, what you see immediately, without exception, I'm not talking about a month or 2 or 6 months of deviation. I'm talking about you have to look at it year by year. Okay, you have to look at it on a continual stream. Socialism always, without exception, causes an economy to go into decline. Why? Simple economic law. Very simple economic law that any idiot with one molecule of a brain cell can understand this law. If you are going to create a massive bureaucratic government to micromanage all business, and we all know how this plays out, you just go to the DMV and see how efficient that is run. That's an example of how government bureaucracies run things. I'm not exaggerating. You all know. Okay? You wait for hours. Nobody return your phone call. Everybody moves in slow motion. That's government. Why? It's not because they're bad people. It's because when you set up a socialist system where people don't have to produce, when you don't reward people for working harder, because socialism doesn't reward you for working harder. Everybody gets the same. The guy who sits home and spends his whatever he's getting free from the government on wine and legalized marijuana gets the same amount of money as the person who's frugal and works hard. Now, with no exceptions, socialism always runs the economy down, damages the economy. And this is why. You have a giant government regulating everything. That causes people to lose jobs without exception, lose money, and then when you create all these programs where you attempt to give away all the free Santa Claus gifts that you promised, you don't have enough money, so you knew it going into it. After you get elected, you raise the taxes. Okay, what does raising the taxes do? Like we just said, the less money you have in your pocket, the less you're going to spend money. What does that do? Businesses close, hamburger places close, clothing stores close. Everything starts to shut down like a bunch of dominoes. Everything shuts down because people can't afford to buy anything, and because they're taxed too much under socialism. When people can't afford to buy anything, businesses close. That means people get fired and lose jobs. That means people have less money to spend. That means there's massive layoffs. That means there's no money to invent new products, new services. It destroys the entire society. Because anybody with one molecule or one brain cell can figure out that if you're making these promises, which communism does and socialism does, of what they're going to give you, and you can't deliver, the minute you start raising taxes, you crash the entire economic system. So guess what happens? With mathematical precision, it always happens the same way. What good is it to be given the promise that you're going to get a better paying job if there's no jobs available and all the jobs are now paying less? They didn't do you any favors. What good is it to say, okay, we've given you free universal health care, but the government can't afford to fund it and people can't afford to buy it. So now you have third world quality health care. That's horrible. I mean, even in Canada, the universal health care is so horrible that people with any illness, including strep throat or something worse than that, they immediately go into America to get treated medically. The Canadians come into America to get treated medically. Why? Because if you have a strep throat, you might wait a month to go see a doctor. That strep throat can end up killing you. And diabetes and all kinds of things. You can't afford to wait 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 months, or whatever it is. So they have to come to Canada. And so ask yourself the question, do they have free universal health care? No, not really, because they're spending a ton of their own money to have to come into America, pay for it, pay for medical services privately, and then fly back to Canada where they live. They don't have free health care. Doesn't work. Free education. Okay, great. So everybody majors in ridiculous topics of study where they can't get employed. Like, I can't even say the things because I'll be accused of something. So socialism doesn't work, and where socialism always goes, according to the communist leaders who designed it, it's designed to transition you into socialism and Marxism. Now, every Christian in every church in America should know those basic things. Why is our economy improving now like it's never improved before? I don't care whether you like Trump or dislike Trump. That's not the point. The economy is improving because Trump is using ordinary capitalist business principles that have proven to work over hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years. He does things like he doesn't spend the American people's money like a fool. And that includes, it was a real shock for all of us, wasn't it? To see the absolute shameful and disgusting mismanagement of our nation by a whole series of Republican presidents and Democratic presidents. When you saw all of these guys, okay, both Democrat and Republican, not one of them were able to put the economy in a profit position, because not one of them had even the tiniest amount of business experience. They were either, community organizers, or they came from wealthy elite families, or they were put in by somebody wealthy. But none of them. Did you notice that there was something conspicuously absent from all of our presidents? They didn't have it. They knew less about, all of our presidents, with the exception of Trump, knew less about business than anybody who ever managed a pizza place, anybody who managed an ice cream shop, anybody who has to manage a Starbucks, or any kind of business at all, anybody who's been a home cleaning service. I don't care what job you have. You have a basic business knowledge, because you know what things cost, you know what profit is, and all the rest of that stuff. Not one of our presidents had even the most minimal, and don't tell me George Bush Jr. had business experience because Daddy Bush gave him an oil company to manage. Do you think George Bush Jr. really managed the oil business? No. Daddy put in somebody who knew what he was doing. George didn't touch it. George didn't know anything about anything. Oh, I know, you got a soft spot for him, but that's the truth. So it was shameful and disgusting to look at the truth regarding every one of our presidents. They had zero knowledge of economics. Not one of them grew our economy. I mean, we're talking about 60 years, and nobody grew the economy in 60 years. And we were always told there was some mysterious reason why we couldn't grow the economy. And we all knew that didn't sound right. But then after Trump got elected, and within months after being elected, he's causing our economy to profit for the first time. He's causing economic growth for the first time. He's forcing American businesses to quit, sorry for the bluntness, to quit raping the American people. He's forcing American businesses to come back and bring back their good-paying manufacturing jobs into the United States. Because these guys are greedy globalist capitalists. They don't care about you. They're no better than the socialists. So Trump is causing us to have more jobs for African Americans, Hispanics, everyone. The economy is growing. Okay? And he was able to do this as they unleashed an unholy war of demonic hell and lies against them 24/7, starting in the election of 2016, and it continues to this moment. The only president we've ever had in 60 years who's causing our economy to grow, who's standing up for Christian persecution and other things, standing up for pro-life and other things. But let's just talk about economics. The only guy who's causing our economy to grow, which is the only real way you can give working class, middle class Americans more jobs, better jobs, higher paying jobs, not lying jobs that will never come into fruition. And he's able to do all this as the same socialist politicians are unleashing a unholy war against him 24/7, which they're continuing today. They put him through Russian collusion. They put him through everything, and now they're going to put him through more stuff. Anytime anything happens in current events, they blame him. Lies, distortion. All the media saying the same script, attacking. Look in the mirror. How many of us, I don't know anybody who could have stood up to that pressure. That is inhuman pressure. And yet he stood up to inhuman pressure and he built the economy. I mean, you know why? Because he doesn't look for the easy way out. When he makes a commitment, he's committed. He has the spirit of a warrior. You know what? Christians ask me all the time, well, I want a Christian president. First of all, I don't know Trump's heart, whether he's born again or not. Okay? He says he's born again. Okay, so he's born again. But the thing is that this is the point. Christians say, well, I'm uncomfortable with the president who committed the sins like Trump did in his life. I'm very uncomfortable with that. Are you very uncomfortable with that? Are you? So you would rather have somebody who unopposes the killing of fully born babies. You would rather have somebody who fights for the right to abort babies. You'd rather have somebody who puts our economy in a downward spiral and doesn't stand up for Christian freedoms. Is that what you're telling me? You know why God, and I don't claim to be, have a unique pipeline to God, but this is my belief. I wrote that book, Trumpocalypse, which is still a best-selling prophecy book. You ought to get it if you want to understand Trump and the game plan and what's happening now, as well as what's going to happen in the future. Get yourself a copy of Trumpocalypse. So when people say to me, I can't vote for somebody, I've changed my feelings about Trump. Yeah, you changed your feelings about Trump because you never had a mind of your own to begin with. The media brainwashes you. You're a sponge. Of course you're going to change your mind about Trump. Because whatever the media tells you to believe, because you don't have a thought of your own, you're going to change your mind about Trump. I got it. Do you get it? Okay, so here's how it plays out. Trump had something in his character that I don't believe God could find among any of his people. So you had all these Christians who went, I want someone who's a Christian, who's more Christian, and spiritual, holy, and pure. I'm not mocking any of those things. Those things are the characteristics of God. I respect those things. I stand for those things. I believe those things. I'm not mocking those things. I'm mocking the mentality that refuses to come to grip with reality. Could it be that the reason God raised Donald Trump up with all his imperfections, and could it be that God couldn't find a man in the Christian community who was qualified to be president, to run for president? Could that be? I think that is the truth. You know why? The Christian culture does not prioritize tenacity, stick-to-itiveness, not giving up, having a warrior spirit. Doesn't prioritize that. So Trump wanted, God. I believe God chose a man who we could count on to be a champion, not a pansy. And that's what we got. I don't think God could find one. I'm not saying that those men don't exist in the Christian church, but I don't think there's many who exist who have the experience and the talents and the money and the other things necessary to run for president. So that's why he chose Donald Trump with all his imperfections, because I think God looked and said, gee, of all the Christian men I would like to choose to run for president, I'm looking into their hearts and minds right now, and I'm seeing that all of them may start out with good intentions, and if they manage to get elected, after about 6 months of this total hell after 3 months of this total hell and total attacks coming upon them, they're going to say, they're going to come before the American people and talk to their fellow Christians and say, I prayed and I believe the Lord's leading me to step down and resign. Yeah, that's what I think. Because they don't have the unique character that's only forged in fire of commitment and stick-to-itiveness and a warrior spirit. Yeah, that's the truth, whether you like it or not. Because you don't hear any sermons from the pulpits of America about being bold, about being tenacious, about being not giving up. Oh, I'm not talking about it in some cutesy, smirky, little motivational, passive way. I'm talking about in the hellfires of life way. Because I never heard a sermon yet about the sin of cowardice being preached from any pulpit. And yet in the book of Revelation, there's all these lists of abominations and sins that will keep people out of heaven and keep their names out of the book of life. And the very first sin that God names in the book of Revelation is the sin of cowardice, being a coward. I have never been to a men's meeting. I have never heard a sermon. I have never heard of anything except with the exception of myself. I'm not trying to brag, but it's the truth. I've never met anybody in the church who has preached a sermon about the sin of cowardice, being a coward. So when you never preach on the sin of cowardice, guess what happens? You end up, I'm not speaking of all Christian men, of course, but you end up with a large percentage of people who are cowards because they've never been taught from God's word that it's a sin. What do you think about that? It's the truth. So we have these politicians lying to us, and because the people are dumbed down, and sadly, God's people perish for lack of knowledge. God's people perish for lack of wisdom. God's people perish for lack of vision. They're not told the truth. Socialism, communism, Marxism cannot deliver on its promises. It always brings the opposite. It seduces the ignorant. And I think the things that I'm hearing about what they're promising are so unrealistic is not even on the table. It's beyond Santa Claus gifts. They're promising things that they could never deliver. They know it, but that's not the point, because socialism advances on lies. As long as they can get the gullible to believe that they can deliver and they get into office, they don't care what happens once they're in office. And that's the legacy of communism, socialism, and Marxism. Every nation where it's been tried, you end up with people working at slave labor wages. You end up with people who all their freedoms are taken away. There is no social justice in communist nations, socialist nations. There is no social justice. There is no fair wealth redistribution. You have super wealthy people in the, quote, state, capital S, and the rest of the people are dirt poor. They can't keep money. They can't own houses. There's no incentive to work hard, and the economy crashes. There is no deviation or exceptions to what I said. Look at Russia today. Russia has a weak economy. They have a huge military, they have nukes, but they have a weak economy. China has a strong economy. But let's tell the truth about China. Did China get the super strong economy because they used socialist, Marxist, communist principles? Absolutely not. China's economy today, which is very strong, did not come from socialism, Marxism, communism, and its principles. It came from the fact that Rockefeller and the rest of the globalist international banking families secretly financed communist China. They rigged the trade treaties, which Trump is trying to do something about, and they created this artificial situation called cheating, which allowed China's economy to boom. Because you see, look, it's really simple. China, now remember, communist China made the promises to their people that every communist nation did. Oh, we're going to give you much better paying jobs and you're going to have a much better life. Okay, so how did China make its money? How did it have this powerful economy? It paid their people slave labor wages, or forced hundreds of millions of their people to work as slaves, laboring 12 hours or more a day, making American running shoes and TVs and computers and everything else. factories going 24/7 all over Russia. The people are working as slaves or slave labor wages. That's unfair competition. So American workers are now losing their jobs like crazy. And now you have these big retailers that buy all their goods in China so they can sell them cheaper. And what you have is China's economy became huge because the globalists, the international bankers, rigged the system to give them an unfair advantage. When you have slave labor, no country that's paying their people a decent wage can compete. So all the money gets sucked out of America, all the manufacturing gets sucked out of America, and all the jobs get sucked out of America, and China is booming. Now, this has been going on from one president to another, Republican and Democrat. So now for the first time, Trump is trying to get it back to be a fair competition. Oh, and on top of that, China stole all kinds of technology, secrets, and everything else, which they didn't have to invest in. So they were allowed to cheat. China did not become economically powerful due to socialism, Marxism, and communism. And the problem right now in China is it's corrupt. You have a very wealthy, billionaire, millionaire, multimillionaire, communist state class of the super wealthy. I saw a picture about a year ago about the new class of the super wealthy communist elite in China. And there was like 40 cars in the picture. And it was all these $150,000, $200,000 cars, the highest end sports cars made from all around the world. And these were the toys of the communist elite. So the people live like peasants or slaves. You have some middle class, but nothing to speak of. And like all communist nations, they didn't deliver on their promise. Okay? Social justice? There's no social justice. There's a camera aimed on you 24/7. You're under total surveillance. You're under what they call the Communist Chinese social credit system. And so you're monitored, and you see people's faces when the camera's monitoring them, built by the whores at the big tech industry in America, surveillance technology, and there's a numerical score in front of everybody's picture. It's constantly going up or down, up or down. And when it starts to go down, when it starts to go up, you get little rewards from the Communist Party. But when it starts to go down, like you get caught reading your Bible. Well, if you get caught reading your Bible, they'll throw you in jail. You lose points. If you say God bless you when someone sneezes, that's a crime because you use the word God. And see, your behavior is monitored 24/7 with numbers going up and down constantly. That is total slavery, my friend. Total slavery. So they promise to liberate the worker. Communism promises a worker's paradise. Does that sound like a worker's paradise to you? What about Cuba? Does that sound like a worker's paradise to you? What about Russia? Does that sound like a worker's paradise to you? What about North Korea? Does that sound like a worker's paradise to you? Now let's take all these nations and bring up universal health care. And say this to your friends, the ones that are in a trance state. Knowing what we know about all these communist nations, they also promise universal health care. What do you think the quality of universal health care is really like in communist Russia, communist China, Cuba, North Korea? Come on. What do you think it's like in North Korea, the universal health care? What, are you kidding me? What do you think it's like in Russia? Are you really so stupid? I'm not talking to the Paul McGuire Report audience. I'm talking about people that you know and I know. Are they so stupid? Really, are they so stupid to think that there's quality universal health care in Russia and communist China? Unless you're a member of the elite. It's built on lies. So what is going to happen if America makes the fatal decision to go the direction of socialism? I can tell you what's going to happen because history teaches us what's going to happen. There's no deviation ever. Once the promises are made, the politicians who promise socialism get elected. Okay? Then the door slams shut. They get what they want. They're in power. They won't get kicked out of power. And guess what? Then everybody faces a collective reality check. All of a sudden, everything gets worse everywhere. You lose freedoms, the economy crashes, and on and on and on. And it becomes a nightmare. America becomes a hellhole like every communist nation. And now the course is irreversible because despite what you heard about democratic socialism, once socialists get into power, they write laws to make sure they never get out of power, or they use the military illegally to keep themselves in power. That's called a police state and a dictatorship. And then, what you really need to know, and I explain all this in my book, The Greatest Battle for the Hearts and Minds of Mankind in the History of the World, because this is the mental battle that's going on in the minds of millions of Americans, millions of millennials. They're weighing these things. This is a spiritual battle. Okay? This is a spiritual battle that has spiritual consequences. These soft, and they are soft, Christian evangelical pastors with their Gerber baby food sermons, they're not preparing God's people. They're giving them narcotics, man. They're dazed. They're giving them the theological equivalent of an injection of morphine, man. They're stoned. They can't see the obvious. They can't see reality. In my book, The Greatest Battle for the Hearts and Minds of Mankind in the History of the World, which you can pre-order now. If you pre-order now, you get a financial discount. And you get your copy before it's released to the general public, and you get an autographed copy. I expose in detail what I consider the biggest, darkest secret about socialism, Marxism, and communism, which is, first of all, that it was totally financed by the globalist elite and the super capitalists starting in the 1920s. That is a fact with documentation. Number two is that secretly, while pretending to be atheists, the major communist leaders in places like Russia and a number of other communist nations, while they pretended to be atheists because they abolish religion, they make religion illegal. In the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx says, abolish religion, abolish morality. Did you hear that? Abolish religion. They mean the Christian religion. Abolish Christian morality. They pretend to be atheists, but the secret is they're practicing occultists, members of secret occult societies like the Illuminati, like others, and they're also Satanists. And that isn't just verbiage. I have documentation for you. I've known this quite a while, but I have new documentation. I can talk to you about Lenin and Trotsky, the communist leaders, their membership, their reliance on the Illuminati, their connection with secret occult societies, and their personal involvement in satanic secret occult societies. And this is true, this is documented, but it's even darker than that. What you need to know, and I have read the documentation, and I'm putting it in the book, is that as a Christian, what you need to understand is that part of the formula that the socialists, communists, Marxists use secretly behind the scenes with their involvement, the Illuminati and these secret occult societies, and they openly write about it, for crying out loud, in their own books, which you could go to any library and get for free. You're going to have to do a lot of reading. They deliberately destroy morality They deliberately destroy all Christian sexual morality. They deliberately destroy the family unit. Their number one target is to totally destroy Christianity. Their other methodologies are, and this is documented in multiple places, their other documented methodologies are they actually promote immorality. The more deviant, the better. They promote drug use. They promote meaningless. They promote chaos. They promote despair, because all of the things that I just mentioned to you are the tools of destruction they use to destroy a nation like America, which was or still is, to whatever degree. They use this to destroy a Christian nation like America. This is how they destroy it within, or Christian nations in Europe. This is how the people behind the French Revolution. The French Revolution is the mother of the Communist Revolution. They deliberately understood that by destroying Christianity, destroying morality, promoting perversion, okay, I'm talking about perversion on steroids, that what this does, when you see, God has created us with both spiritual laws and psychological laws. Tragically, the communist leaders, the socialist leaders, and the Marxist leaders, even the leaders of the French Revolution, who secretly are members of occult societies, they understand better than Bible teachers and pastors and most Christians. They understand better how, when you violate and destroy God's spiritual laws, the exact evil consequences that are produced in the psychological nature of people, and how by destroying these virtues of God, it's not just arbitrary. Every time you break down morality, the family, Christianity, and you promote perversion or whatever, it has a very scientific but demonic effect on American society or a Christian nation in general. Now, I explained it in detail in my book, The Greatest Battle for the Hearts and Minds of Mankind in the History of the World. But let me give you a case in point. I'm reading the French philosopher Voltaire, who secretly hated Christianity. He was demon-possessed. He hated Christianity. And he wrote, just like the Marxists and the communists and the socialists, that once you begin to do everything you can to get people to be addicted to sexual immorality of every kind, okay, which is happening in America, by doing that, and to get them involved in immorality of every kind, drunkenness, drug use, orgies, I'm not going to go through the list. You all know what the list is. The deeper the American people get involved in those things, what happens is it's a scientific, psychological law that the Marxists, the communists, and the socialists understand. What happens when the American people get hooked onto that kind of stuff, it causes them psychologically to they call it unrestrained desires. It's the exact wording. It goes back to the French Revolution. Once you inflame unrestrained desires, the psychological result is that people who were Christians or people that were God-fearing, they once they begin to get involved in giving in to every perverse desire and practicing it, there's the psychological transformation that occurs in their minds and hearts. They feel empowered to release everything of darkness in their heart. See, it's there's an integration between the spiritual and the psychological. And unfortunately, Satanists and Marxists and communists understand it better than God's people. Oh, that's shameful. That's shameful. You can preach about all the importance of godliness and virtues, but unless you unmask the devices of the enemy, you're just playing church. It's disgusting. People who play church, it's disgusting. This is what happens. Once you get enticed into all this spectrum of immorality, which is done on purpose, then a psychological change happens to you subtly. You lose your ability to perceive right and wrong. It's kind of like when Adam and Eve ate of the forbidden fruit. It changed their perception, but not in the way they thought it would. So when you get involved in all these, what the Bible calls sinful activities, it changes the psychological structure of your personality, and then you begin to do things without even thinking about it that you never would have done in the past, such as you allow yourself to express uncontrolled violence, including murder. You allow yourself to lie, cheat, deceive, destroy. You become a very dark person, okay? In all these different areas that don't appear to be, at first glance, directly related to the involvement in these sinful activities that communism promotes. You see, the communists have demonic intelligence. Oh, I wish you knew what I was talking about. Demonic intelligence. We're supposed to have the intelligence of the Holy Spirit. But they're more dedicated in their commitment to demonic intelligence than God's people are committed right now in America to biblical intelligence. It's shameful. My heart breaks for what's going to happen to this nation if we don't turn the course. They understand that the Frankfurt School Marxists that I've been talking to you about, they listed the same thing. Destroy Christianity. Destroy marriage. Destroy morality. You want to know the truth, man? You want to know how horrible this is? You will be offended. I'm warning you right now. If you're not prepared to be offended, or if you're vulnerable to being sucked into a sinful lifestyle, then you better not walk in the way that I'm going to talk about. You better not do it. If you look at the comprehensive sexual education programs that are being taught in the public schools, that are being taught by Planned Parenthood, that are being taught by psychists, that are being taught by UNESCO out of the United Nations, I am telling you, I'm no prude from Sunnybrook Farm. The smorgasbord of sexual perversion and immorality that they're showing our children explicitly in video, on the internet, in pictures, and they're telling them everything under the sun in terms of deviation and perversion is normal, and you need to pursue it with everything in you. Why do you think they're doing that? I could talk to 1,000 Christian pastors, and they couldn't tell me why they're doing that. That is disgusting. How can you wage a spiritual warfare if you don't even know what your enemy's doing? You know why they're doing that? They understand that there's a connection between the destruction of the human personality, and that if you can get that into the kids, what happens as a result of that exposure and creating those new normal lifestyles is that when it comes to areas like violence, murder, chaos, lying, cruelty, anarchy, beating people to death. We hear the news reports. We're hearing stuff. It's just the beginning, baby. It's the first wave. We hear about cruelty like we've never heard before from young kids. Beating people and kicking them in the face shamelessly when it's on the ground. That didn't come out of nowhere. That came from the psychological demonic intelligence corruption through immorality. You see, once you cause certain walls to fall and safeguards that God has put in the human personality, once you collapse them, man's nature becomes increasingly more demonic. You understand that? And what that means is that's what they want. And why do they want it? Because they can't take us to the next phase, which they've openly written about. They've told us what the phase is. Christians would stop playing church and read what the next phase is. Maybe they'd stop playing church. They have to do this to psychologically change people so they will be ready to go into full-blown anarchy, full-blown violent communist revolution. You see, it changes the personality, so people now will be violent, they'll be cruel, they'll be anarchists, they will do horrible things, they'll burn down buildings, they'll shoot people, massacre them. All this stuff happens, but they want that because that's how they storm the gates and move from a politically correct Frankfurt School communist revolution into a full-blown Stalin-Lenin communist revolution where you torch your enemies, you shoot them in the face, you gun down Christians by the thousands, by the millions, you send people to concentration camps and you kill them. You think this is a fantasy I'm telling you? You think it's a fantasy? You think it's a daydream? Are you so inept? I'm not talking about listeners of the Paul McGuire Report. I have to speak strong. And if it upsets people, so be it. If people misjudge my character, so be it. I would rather rock the boat. This is me blowing the shofar. My shofar is to use intense language because I don't have a lamb's horn to blow through. That would mean anything to anybody. And certainly blowing a trumpet isn't going to help anybody but a Boy Scout. So I have to use a trumpet of warning, a shofar of warning, because I'm a faithful watchman. I'm awake. I didn't fall asleep on my job. You understand what that means? I didn't fall asleep on my job. And neither did you, or you wouldn't be listening. We have got to wake God's people up before this whole thing comes crashing down. Yes, we have an election which may delay it. But what happens after the next election? Do you think that they're going to stop the unrelentless assault against this man? No, they're not. Because there's a deep state involved. And behind the deep state is the globalist elite. Now, we can turn this thing around. Yeah, it's a winnable war. But it's going to require a radical 180-degree change. And the only way that I can see to precipitate that, besides calling on God, fasting and praying and repenting, which is first and foremost, is to, for me, I have to blow the trumpet, the shofar. Well, guess what? We're living in, the age of computers and satellites and laptops and cell phones. If I blew a lamb's horn, I think it's great when people do that, but it doesn't communicate anything tangible. If I stood here on the radio, Paul McGuire Report, and blew a trumpet, what would that do? People would have spiritual goosebumps, and that was it. They'd go back to sleep. So I have to use vocabulary to grab people's imagination, to shatter the strongholds. I hope you understand my motive. It's love. I'm loving my neighbor as myself. If I allowed my neighbor to perish, I wouldn't be loving, would I? This is the battle for our lives. This is the great spiritual battle before the return of the Lord. Don't deceive yourself. We are in, right now, at this moment, the greatest spiritual battle. Yeah, that's right. We're in it right now before the return of the Lord. So we either show up and enlist and obey God, or we cop out and we run. But remember, for those that you know that want to run, cowardice is the first sin listed in all these other sins in the book of Revelation that keeps you out of heaven. I need your help. This is a serious war. I need your help. I need prayer warriors to storm the gates of hell on my behalf, for me, my family, and this ministry. I need people to spread the message like their lives depend on it, because it does, by sending the links of what we produce far and wide to get around this dictatorial censorship. And then I need people who will literally seek the face of God and radically obey him when they ask him, Lord, how can I help Paul McGuire Ministries and Paradise Church? How much do you want me to contribute financially? What do you want me to give in terms of a donation or a contribution? And then whatever God tells you, no matter what it is, you obey him. And that includes something beyond what you've ever considered, but it also includes basic faithfulness, just to contribute regularly the small amount you can, because you're being faithful. You're being faithful. You see, we're rewarded on the basis of what we've been given. I need your help to continue this. This is a winnable war, but these kinds of ideas have to be ignited in the body of Christ, and it's not going to happen by being Mr. Nice Guy. I hate to tell it to you. Mr. Nice Guy, it's not that we're supposed to be Mr. Bad Guy, don't get me wrong. We're supposed to be loving. But we have to break through the lethargy, the complacency, and the apathy, and that takes emotional intensity. God bless you. I'm Paul McGuire. Thank you for listening. Thank you for praying for me. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your letters and emails of encouragement. They mean an enormous amount to me. We can win this war. Everything in me knows that. I know that. I know that because why else would Jesus Christ have said, occupy until I come, if he didn't give us the power and he didn't have the desire that we would occupy until he comes? God bless you. I'm Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us.